We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. It's episode number 750. We are not doing anything special. Tom's video has already frozen. It's wonderful, and I'm assuming by the facial expression he made that my voice came through super loud like it did last week.
No!
Who knows?
No, what happened? No, I was just looking at my coffee.
You're okay. I mean, it hasn't switched cameras yet. It just froze on us, which is like the precursor to your camera switching.
No, it doesn't. I can see myself moving in my own camera.
Yeah.
No, I can. Oh no, I'm frozen.
Yeah,
now.
you're frozen now.
Oh, I'm back.
You're back.
I'm moving.
I know, that's what it does. It's all right.
Okay. I don't know. I guess I need a new camera. I guess that's what it is.
I think it's just a little loose USB connection.
But
somewhere.
what am I gonna do? I can't fix it.
No, not right now. Besides, we're under.
I mean, at all. I don't.
We're
know how to
under
fix
the
it.
gun this week for time, and
Oh, well, that's not going to stop me
oodles of
from
news.
babbling. That's not going to stop me. I haven't even had coffee yet. This is like my first cup of coffee. Oh, it switched.
It did.
Oh.
Tom's on a different camera. All right. Well, while he sorts that out, I don't mind sharing that I am
Rob's
very,
gone.
very, very happy because I was assigned a time through my employer. As I've mentioned, part of my employment does require me to interact with the public. So not to say I'm skipping the line on vaccinations because in Canada we are a couple months behind the US. So age-wise, I wouldn't be getting yet. But because of my employment, I am getting my first dose of vaccine on the day that we're recording this later on today. So I'm very pleased about that.
That sound you're hearing is me clapping for
Yes,
Rob.
that's right.
That's not something else.
Just very much
it would be, but it's not that.
Very much hoping that absolutely everybody else can get theirs as quickly as humanly possible.
That's right.
There you go.
That's what I hope too. All right. So, we got a lot of stuff to talk about, but rip Logitech and Harmony.
That is coming up in the news for sure.
I mean, it's already the name of the podcast.
That's right. Yes.
So, I mean,
what else would it be?
What else would it be at this point? I mean, I feel like my sister got ran over by a freaking car. That's what I feel like when they told me that Harmony was going to.
It's like that slight little bit of panic that went through all of us when we heard that news.
I'm like, it's like you clutched your chest and went, but what am I going to do?
That's right. Yes, there is a bit of that.
What am I going to do?
And we're going to try to help sort that out to the extent that we're able to at this moment. We're going to try. That's the tease for the upcoming news in just a couple of minutes here.
That's right. All right. I want to thank, first of all, this is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. Which I kind of wish I hadn't associated the podcast with my Twitter so I could post like all the things I want to post.
I mean, you can always make another Twitter account. That's what a lot of people do.
I'm not going to do that, though. I'm just not going to do that. But let's thank our listeners of the week. To become the listener of the week, you just have to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. You can also go to patreon.com/avrantpodcast, where you can become a continuing supporting member of our podcast community. Right now, we have 124 patrons, including Bertrand. Every month, a little bit of money comes from them and goes to us. So however much, I think it's $1 minimum.
That's right.
And you can maximum as much as you want. So we want to thank our 124 patrons as well as Bertrand.
Indeed. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, a voluntary subscription, if you please. And thanks very much to our 124 patrons over there. Bertrand, thank you very much for being one of them.
That's right. Dazz, first of all, if you can't support us financially, we totally understand. But if you do something to support us, let us know what it is so that we can mention you. Dazz has been encouraging people on Facebook groups to check out our podcast. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
Dazz.
thanks, Dazz.
We've also, thanks. And we also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going, including from Bertrand, Mark, who's a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club, AJ, Patricio, Michael, and Terry. So thank you to all of you.
Yes, indeed. Bertrand, Mark, AJ, Patricio, Michael, and Terry. Thank you very much for those notes of encouragement, for those notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Really do appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. It's fantastic.
All right, let's get to the news. Decurion? I don't know. Anyways, they're the owners of Pacific Theaters, and ArcLight Cinemas has officially announced they won't be reopening. Not even the famous Cinerama Dome, which I have been to. That's a cool theater. It is extremely loud. I mean, they do not play around with the sound in there. They say that all potential options have been exhausted, but they do not have a viable way forward. All staff have been laid off, and property keys have been handed back to the landlords. Decurion has not filed for bankruptcy, and the facility still exists. The landlords are left with vacant facilities and properties, so the possibility exists for other companies to swoop in. It seems unlikely the historic Cinerama Dome won't be reopened by someone at some point. So,
including a lot of people thinking that what's his name, Tarantino is gonna just buy it himself, since he really
set
loves
every movie
theater.
from now until the end of time in it.
That's right.
It will be featured prominently in every Tarantino's.
I mean, he probably could. I'm sure he has enough to buy that thing.
I don't know how much stuff like that costs, but yeah. Netflix signed a deal with Sony Pictures, giving them the exclusive streaming rights to all of Sony's upcoming theatrical and direct-to-streaming movies. So don't expect to ever find an MCU Spider-Man movies on Disney Plus for at least the next 5 years, which is the length of the reportedly $1 billion deal. And I guess we won't be seeing a Columbia Plus streaming service, even though Sony did launch their high bitrate Bravia Core service that is exclusively available on Sony Bravia XR TV sets and is a pay-per-title service. So whatever.
Yeah.
So that means we're going to be able to watch the Spider-Man movies on...
Spider-Man movies will be on Netflix. That's yeah.
Great.
I mean, we've seen all the other major studios basically bring out their own branded streaming services. And Sony, even though they did bring out this Sony Core service, but that's like paper title, so it's not really the all-you-can-eat subscription model. Instead of making Sony Plus or Columbia TriStar Plus or whatever the heck they were going to do, because it was going to have a plus on the end if they did. Instead, they're just like, hey, Netflix exists. Let's partner with them. They can hand us a whole bunch of money, and we don't have to make our own streaming service. So I'm all for it, frankly, because not having to create an entirely new service and subscribe to it.
But you gave up Netflix.
I did. That's fine.
I'll be honest with you. I know people love the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and I thought they were fine. That was about as... I mean, I didn't hate them.
Yeah.
I thought they were fine. I have no desire to see them again, but I thought they were fine. So... I think people are just so happy that it's not the other Spider-Man movies. But I still remember the first... Spider-Man 2 was just a masterpiece. The Sam Raimi stuff is just a masterpiece. So it's hard for me to be excited that something's not bad anymore, which is pretty much how I feel about the Justice League Snyder Cut, which is people love it, but I'm like, you only love it because the other one sucked, and this one's not as sucky. Whatever. Samsung Electronics, which is the arm of Samsung that actually sells consumer electronics to customers, is not to be confused with Samsung Display, which is their R&D and panel manufacturing division, appears to be in the process of giving into market pressure and ordering millions of OLED panels from rival LG. Last year, Samsung Display announced they would stop manufacturing LCD panels entirely, ceding all LCD panel production to Chinese brands. Instead, they were going to focus on QD OLED, which uses all blue OLED subpixels and then red and green quantum dots, and micro LEDs with self-emissive quantum dots as the hope for the far future. But the reports are that Samsung Electronics rejected the QD OLED panels from Samsung Display. They're fighting, huh? So with LCD beginning to fall by the wayside, micro LED still being too expensive, and their own QD OLEDs not being ready for mass market yet, buying OLED panels from their biggest rival might be their only path forward for the time being. So, Oops.
Yeah, quite unexpected. I mean, we remember back when OLEDs were first coming onto the scene, and LG and Samsung had two different ways of manufacturing OLEDs. Samsung did bring out their own large format OLED TVs for 1 year and 1 year only, and they did RGB subpixels, which is what Sony did as well. And Sony had their professional OLED mastering monitors, which were RGB subpixels, but they only made those for a handful of years. LG bet on this WRGB, where they actually have 4 white OLED subpixels for every pixel, and then they have red, green, and blue color filters that go on top of those, plus just a clear one that lets the white light through to boost the peak brightness. So they different bets on the manufacturing. LG is the only one that's still going with theirs, and so every OLED that is out there, large format OLED, not talking like phone screen sizes, every large format OLED that's out there is LG, and Samsung was betting that they'd have a rival technology to go against it, but it seems like that is not happening this year, so they might be forced to actually buy from their chief competitor, and everyone is like, yeah, these are going to be the first OLEDs that don't support Dolby Vision, because it seems like Samsung still isn't willing to cave on that.
All right, the big one for the home theater crowd, of course, is we already teased it. Logitech has officially stopped manufacturing the Harmony remotes. It was...
And that is a done deal, folks. That is not rumor anymore.
No, that is directly from their blog or whatever. And if you look at they have a Q&A afterward, which is basically them asking themselves questions and answering them. And the answer to all the question is, we will still support our customers. We don't expect there to be any problem with us supporting the customers in the near future. So what you should read to that is, as soon as people start talking about this, we're going to start talking about when we can shut all this crap down.
And
because that's what's
nothing vague whatsoever about, are they going to bring them back? Is it a part shortage? No, they have stated exceedingly clearly that is it. They are not manufacturing any more Harmony remote hardware.
I don't understand. How do you have essentially a stranglehold on the market? And even if it's a small market,
which it is.
How do you have a stranglehold on the market and then give
it up? I have an answer to that.
Oh, what is
which
that?
Is, if the CEO of the company doesn't use it himself, then in their mind, nobody does. Because, I mean, we saw that back. My favorite example of that was Microsoft with... what the heck was the Windows Media Player? That's what I'm trying to think of.
Right.
And that thing, like, people were always kind of surprised that it was still going. Like, when it was still available in Windows 8, people were like, really? I'm kind of surprised that it is. Well, it's because there were like 2 executives at Microsoft that used it at their house. So they're like, yeah, it's got to keep going. And as soon as they stopped using it or they moved on from the company, that was the end of Windows Media Center. So, like, the Logitech CEO that came in a few years ago, all along he's been like, yeah, I don't care about Harmony remotes. And so, that's it. That's what it comes down
ridiculous.
to.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah, it's a bit nuts, but that is it. It is a done deal. You can tell they didn't even bother to put out a press release. They put it on their blog. Like I say, the answers on the blog are in no way unclear. It is not vague whatsoever, but to them, it's not even worthy of a press release to say that they're discontinuing this entire series of products. But yes, that is the news. Now the rest of the details.
Yeah, so back when this was a rumor, we detailed 4 potential alternatives, which we will link to you. We won't. You can see that in the show notes. We won't repeat all the details again, but we mentioned Sofa Baton U1, the Roomy remote, the home remote, and Neo N-E-E-O remote by Control 4. Since Logitech has, since the announcement struck some panic throughout the home theater community, we went looking and found a couple more potential options. We have the MyU remote, is another software solution that runs on your phone or tablet. Appears to offer similar functionality as Roomy remote, but at a lower price for about $35. You'll need to add a global cache network to IR adapters to control any IR devices, or run it on the phone or tablet that has a built-in IR blaster. There's so many of those.
Yeah, so we should just mention that MyU remote, Roomy remote, and the home remote, those are all apps that run on a phone or tablet.
Right.
So there's no physical hardware. They're not selling their own, wand that you hold in your hand. All of those are relying on a phone or a tablet. Now, I would recommend these days, because when I haven't used any of them extensively. I've looked at like the very, very preliminary setup things of each of them, and from my very cursory glance at it, it does look like Roomy Remote probably has the most things in their database and one of the easiest looking setups as far as you just, hit the plus button and add things. Now, the other two work similarly. We did actually get a response, or Tom did over at avgadgets.com, got a response from the developer of the home remote directly saying, hey, you can get the app on your phone for free, that you don't have to pay anything for that. If you want to really dig into like customizing the interface, you have to do that on a Windows PC, and that costs money. It's only $5, but that costs a little bit of money. But if you just want the app and what's already in the database and the default way that, all the buttons show up and that, you can do that for free with the home remote. So I went through that little trial, and it's like, it's not quite as easy as the way Harmony software was. The database isn't quite as large, and I mean, all of that is probably to be expected, but those are all software versions. So definitely things that are worth checking out, especially if, you're just without a Harmony remote and need something right now that can work.
All right. For something that actually puts a remote in your hand, not just a phone app, and controls IR, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi without having to buy additional adapters, there's Sevenhugs.
What?
Hugs?
Sevenhugs.
Sevenhugs? Sevenhugs?
How did the word seven mess you up?
I don't know.
Very common word.
All these, like, I have not had any caffeine. I'm drinking two different sources of caffeine at the same time, and I'm getting a little, whatever. Sevenhugs smart remote, and either the $350 U version or a $400 X version. Okay. So there's a U version and X version. The Smart Remote X includes a bunch of sensors that you stick on the surfaces around your room. The X uses those sensors to detect where you are pointing, and it automatically switches to whatever device you're aiming at. Not necessarily super useful if you have a stack of gear, and only needed for IR devices. The biggest drawbacks we see with it are that it is touchscreen only, no physical buttons, and it's way smaller than you might think. It's barely any bigger than the Apple TV remote, and it's actually a bit smaller than the Roku remote, which means its touchscreen buttons are tiny. It gives haptic feedback, so you can feel when you've clicked a button, but you need good dexterity and eyesight to avoid pushing the wrong button. That is a small remote.
It is very small.
I've got that Roku remote, and that thing is small.
Right.
This thing is tiny.
Yeah, when you see the images of it just by itself, it appears like, if that were standard remote size, then those buttons would be, perfectly reasonable sized, even though it's touchscreen only. You wouldn't think anything of it, but when you actually see the physical thing next to the teeny tiny Apple TV remote or the Roku remote that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's actually, like we say, it's smaller than a Roku remote. Okay, so
what's the U version? The U version doesn't include all the sensors?
It doesn't have the like positional aiming sensors. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't want the positional aiming
Then
sensors,
you can save $50 and get the U
Bob's
version. That's right.
Yeah. Michael, this is a comment from one of our listeners. Michael, so when we boiled it down to an absolute minimum, we said you need just one speaker, eh? And where might that speaker go? Over to one side, somewhere in the back, above your head? No, it would go directly in front of you, wouldn't it? Boom. Center speakers are the most important speaker confirmed. Shut up. And since we mentioned this supposed resurgence of cassette tapes, do we remember the physical format that didn't have any vinyl pops and didn't have any tape hiss, but still let you make mixtapes? That's right. It's time for MiniDiscs to make a comeback. MiniDiscs never made a appearance, much less a comeback. I think I've seen like 2 of them in my life, and I
know quite a few radio stations used them for a while. They were very handy, and they used them.
They are. They are very handy.
Although you can really mimic a lot of the same functionality with a USB thumb drive now. So that would be real hipster to get on MiniDisc as your next format. Yeah. I don't know. It wouldn't shock me to have somebody writing articles about MiniDisc in the next coming year or two because, it is the recycling of old formats.
Yeah. So let's get on to the questions here. It looks like this is a long setup here.
It is.
Bertrand in Quebec, and some very similar questions from JR, so we mixed them together.
Yes.
First off, Bertrand placed a fairly large order with Electronics for Less in Canada. Sadly, it was not a great experience. One of the main reasons he ordered from them was because they offered a hefty discount for buying everything all at once, and he made sure to only include items that they said they had in stock. But then they didn't ship his Marantz SR8015 receiver, the most expensive and important item in the whole order. They also sent the wrong model of NVIDIA Shield. He ordered the Pro, and they sent the Tube.
Yeah.
Seems like that should be easy to identify which one was which, but whatever. The customer service experience trying to get things corrected was not pleasant. They didn't want to cover shipping costs for the mistakes they had made, and no matter what, he was going to be stuck without an AV receiver for a couple of months if he waited on them. So unfortunately, that was a sour note as he was completing his home theater build. But he found a demo unit of a Marantz SR8015 at a local store for a good price that was in pristine condition. And with the door to his theater finally installed, he finally got to plug everything in and try it all out for the first time. Happily, he was impressed with the results right away. But he'd like to ask a couple of questions here. So he went with a 77-inch CX OLED from LG. He looked up some settings from Ratings and a couple of others online.
Ratings.
Ratings. That's how it's spelled.
It is.
Ratings. Okay. Anyways. He recommended the recommended settings weren't identical on every site, but they were pretty darn close. Also to turn off the power saving features, which are on by default, and then select either ISF dark or filmmaker mode as your picture mode. After that, there honestly wasn't much to do. The TV automatically activated HDR deep color as soon as he plugged in a 4K HDMI source, and it automatically went into the recommended HDR and Dolby Vision picture modes the first time he played those types of sources. Is it really that simple? There are a gazillion settings available in the TV's menus, but he doesn't have to touch them. But if he doesn't have to touch them, that's fine. He just wants to feel certain. You answer this question. I can hear my son in the other room doing something that I need to go.
Okay, no problem. So happily, Bertrand, it is that simple now. Now, before you go, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's like it's taken us years to get to this point, and even then, it's not as though literally straight out of the box it's ready to go. Straight out of the box, the power saving things are on, which drastically reduces the image quality that you would see straight out of the box. It's in the automatic whatever it is, it dims and brightens picture mode, APS or ADS, automatic power saving, I think it is. So APS picture mode is like the default out of the box, whereas, filmmaker mode is right there, ISF dark mode is right there, but you still have to at least press the settings button and go and do that manually. So it's not quite where we would want it ideally, which is you plug the thing in and you actually are ready to go, but happily. The filmmaker mode, the ISF dark mode really are that good where, short of calibrating manually, professionally calibrating the colors to be, spot on, there's virtually nothing else you have to do other than put it in those picture modes. And again, happily, once you do that, when you go into HDR10, when you go into Dolby Vision, it's going to be in the correct HDR10 cinema mode. It's going to be in the Dolby Vision cinema mode. And those are objectively as close as you can get out of the box. And you are pretty much ready to go. So feel very content. This being, as far as I can tell, the first time you've built a completely dedicated room to being just a home theater. If you were to invest in hiring a professional calibrator, make sure you talk to them first and make sure it's someone that you can have a discussion with while they're doing it, because it's really the education that's valuable to you. Chances are you're not going to visually see a huge difference, but getting that education might be valuable. But yeah, you can feel very certain. And so JR was also installing pretty much the exact same TV, 77-inch C10 OLED. For Tom, who's just back, I'm on to B now. So he was also following the Ratings settings. But for him, it wasn't...
Ratings. Say it right.
Ratings is how they want us to say it.
Well, they should just spell it that way.
But they wanted the SOE. So it wasn't quite as simple for him.
SEO.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I mixed those up.
See, I'm not the only one who makes mistakes around here, people.
Absolutely not. When it's not written out and I'm not prepared, that's how it goes on. So JR, he's got an Apple TV 4K, a PS4, and a Panasonic Blu-ray player as his sources, so all of those are plugged into his Denon X3700H, and then he has his Denon's main HDMI output, the one that's marked 8K, that's plugged into his OLED's eARC port with a certified ultra-high-speed HDMI cable, and I can say right there, JR, for the sources you have, that wasn't actually necessary, but it's also completely fine because you are prepared for, if you get future sources, there's no downside to what you did. good. I'll let Tom go the rest of the setup on this one.
All right, so he set up his picture mode to filmmaker mode, but when he booted up a game on his PS4, the TV somehow automatically switched into game mode. Turned on Ultra HD Deep Color and turned on Instant Game Response. He manually set filmmaker mode auto change to on, but it doesn't seem to automatically switch back from game mode the way he thought it would. He's become confused by some of the advice he's found online because they say to use different inputs on your TV for your game consoles, and then you can have the dedicated picture settings just for those. But he's using his AV receiver as an HDMI switch, so he can't do that. Can we help him sort things out?
So... No. I suspect, because it's on by default, and there's not really much reason you would think to turn it off, because it appears like it should be a handy feature, which is there is the AI picture mode, which is on by default, and that attempts to detect what type of content you're watching and change the picture mode on you. Without your manual input, automatically change the picture mode on you to whatever type of signal the artificial intelligence has detected that you're using. The reason I say that is because the PS4 and the PS5 do not have the HDMI 2.1 feature called auto low latency mode. The Xbox consoles do. And so if you have auto low latency mode activated both in your television and in your Xbox game console, this is exactly what it's supposed to do, which is when you play a game on your Xbox, it should automatically kick your television into the game mode, which will deliver the lowest input lag. But the trick there is that once you go to a different source, once you're out of your Xbox, it will automatically switch back to whatever your picture mode that you set manually with the auto low latency.
So this is just staying in that mode because it's being connected to the game console no matter what.
This is staying in.
He wants it to change from game mode when he changes from a game to a movie within this console, but
that's right.
It's not smart enough to know that.
Since the PS4 and the PS5 do not have the auto low latency mode, the only thing that's doing this automatic picture mode switching for you, is the AI picture mode in your LG TV. So that is the feature you need to find and turn off, is the AI picture mode. Now, what that should do is just let you manually set the picture mode and it stays there regardless of which source you're watching. But you might want to then manually switch to the game mode when you're using your PS4 to actually play games, because it does have the lowest input lag. So it's not necessarily going to be the most user-friendly experience, but it beats having it stuck in game mode for everything else. Now, the other thing you could consider is game mode can be just as accurate as any other mode. If you manually adjust the settings of game mode, picture mode, it can be just as accurate as any other. So leaving it in game mode 100% of the time is not a terrible idea, as long as you manually adjust its settings to be accurate for movies and television. So you could do that. The final thing you could consider doing is running a second HDMI cable from your X3700H to a second input on your television. And that way you can say, okay, it's monitor output 1 when I'm using movies and TV, monitor output 1 on my Denon going to, let's say, input 2 on my television, whereas it's monitor output 2 going to input 3 on my television when it's game time. And then you can just switch things on your remote that way so that you are using a different HDMI input on your television for games.
Right. So Bertrand went with a Panasonic UB820 for his Ultra HD Blu-ray player. How can he make sure he has all of those settings optimized? There's some YouTube links here.
Yes. Yeah. Rather than literally going through all the settings again, we went through the settings once on our own podcast, so I will include the link with a timestamp in the link, so it takes you right to where we went through the settings for the Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray players. I'll also include the YouTube links for Shane over at Spare Change. He ran through them, and Vincent Teo over at HD TV Test. He really went in depth with the HDR optimizer if you're particularly interested in that feature. So between those 3 links, you will get very detailed settings for any of the Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray players, and those will be in the show notes for this episode number 750.
Oh, good. So he went with all Martin Logan Motion Series speakers. I'm pouring some soda.
I
if you
can
wonder
hear
what
that,
hissing
yes.
sound is. He isn't 100% satisfied with the way his 50 XTI center is sounding. He used the word imaging as to what is dissatisfying about his center, which is funny because it doesn't image.
Not in that way, yeah.
It is just below his TV, and he elevated the center and TV enough so the speaker is above his feet when he is reclined. He could try to fiddle with precisely how the center is aimed, but do we have any tips on how to get a center sounding its best? He's using a 3-in-1 TV stand with a center on its own shelf. Boy, I wish this wasn't so dark.
It is very, very
So I could
dark,
actually
although
see
that
it.
gives us a clue as to the sort of viewing conditions that he is using. But we
Yeah.
can see his feet in one picture, and we can see the height of the
We
television,
can.
and we can tell there is a gap between the top of his toes and the bottom of the TV, and that is where his center speaker
I
resides.
really don't think that your toes are sucking up so much sound.
That wouldn't be
Yeah. So I don't know. Is your center pushed back inside of your cabinet on that shelf?
I mean, it isn't really even
is-
a thing that could, because it's just an open shelf that's just
right.
there.
But if it's back, if
I
it's
see, right.
pushed far enough back, it could be, bouncing top to bottom, basically. That's one thing. I mean, I would consider aiming it, I guess. I mean, just with pads or whatever. So I mean, it's satisfying imaging.
I know, yeah. Having to puzzle that out is a little bit tough because so when we typically talk about imaging as a subjective word for part of what is going on with listening to speakers, that
I'm guessing he means timbre mismatch is what I'm guessing.
yeah,
he means, but
that
go
would
on.
make the most sense. But imaging, typically we're talking like a stereo pair of speakers. We know that the where the sound is emanating in a stereo pair is not literally straight in front of us, if we're getting
Right.
that center stereo image, or if it's just a little bit left of center or just a little bit right of center. Physically there isn't a speaker there, but it can sound like there is because of stereo imaging. Now that's what we typically refer to as imaging, that ability to make it seem as though the source of a sound is coming from a location where no speaker physically exists. Now, we wouldn't expect a center to have a problem with imaging because the only place that it should seem like sound is coming from with a center speaker is from the center speaker location. Maybe, though, he's talking about, the thing we've mentioned, which is the speaker physically resides below the screen, but when you're watching people's lips move, your brain moves the sound of their voice from below the TV screen to their lips on the screen, and maybe he's actually detecting that the sound is coming from below his screen, and he's actually getting that separation between where he sees the lips moving, where he can audibly tell where the sound is coming from. That is a type of imaging that the center speaker would be doing. You didn't say that specifically, but if that's really what he's talking about, that could make some sense. Now, one reason why all of this makes a bit of sense to me is the Martin Logan Motion Series speakers. They are that folded ribbon tweeter design.
Right.
They are directional speakers. They can beam those high frequency sounds. It's not super wide dispersion horizontally or vertically. It's a pretty narrow beam of sound at high frequencies that comes out of those. So there's a couple of things that go on with that because he went to the trouble of trying to elevate everything so that he could get the center speaker's tweeter as close to ear level as his front left and right. And then he's aimed it at his face so that it's like right at his face. Now that can actually be a little bit of an issue with directional folded ribbon tweeter or other types of tweeters that are more directional, because your front left and right speakers, they're towed in, but they're not like right at you. You're a little bit off axis from them. So if you are dead on axis to that center speaker tweeter, its sound can now be noticeably different in timbre and in pinpoint location from the front left right, where you're a little bit off axis from those. So this is one of those unintuitive situations where, because you have such a directional focused sounding tweeter, it might actually be beneficial to not have it aimed straight at your face, to get it a little bit off axis from you so that it's now more similar and not quite as like, oh, it's right there, pinpoint.
Right. So that's why I went to like my first thought here was that what you're really experiencing is a timbre mismatch, and that can manifest itself in if you've got your side speakers in a more normal orientation, maybe facing straight out or just slightly towed in, and then you've got your center channel directly at your face. Those are the same tweeters, but because you have a different orientation in them as far as how they're angled, it's going to sound different.
Right.
So, the other thing, I mean, there could be a lot of stuff going on here because we don't really know what you mean by your question. There could be a lot of stuff going on here, but I would play with speaker positioning and not just your center channel.
Right.
It could be that you have faced them all straight out, so you're way off axis from the left and right speaker, and now as you're panning across, you're getting gaps as well. So there could be a lot of stuff going on here. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the speakers. I doubt that, but
not likely.
I would think that, I mean, it could be that one of the tweeters is blown. You don't know. I mean, it could be something wrong with it, but chances are it's just a positioning issue.
Yeah.
So
one thing to
have fun.
not be afraid of with speakers like this, again, it's unintuitive. It doesn't seem like the normal way, because normally we would think, okay, maybe the center speaker's a little bit below me, and in order to get it a little bit off axis, I just have it pointing straight forward instead of tilting it up a little bit to aim at my face. Now, with a folded ribbon tweeter with that very limited vertical dispersion, sometimes that doesn't sound the greatest either. And what ends up working better for speakers, specifically like this one, is actually having it tilted up more than directly at your face, right? So like the tweeter's actually firing a little above your head. It feels weird. It looks weird at first, but I mean, we've seen in his room, it's so dark in there that he's really not going to be able to see it when he's looking at the TV screen. So don't worry about the visuals. And sometimes that, even though it feels a bit weird, that it delivers the best response. We want you to not be afraid of giving it a try, because it doesn't cost you anything.
This is the podcast that's suggested to people that they sometimes tow their speakers in so much that they cross in front of them. So
similar thing.
Yeah. So he says he ran Audyssey. The final interior dimensions of his room are only 12 by 14. It's fully carpeted. He has 8 DIY absorption panels in there for now. He intends to add DIY corner base trapping, but he hasn't made those yet. Audyssey's auto setup set distances that look pretty accurate. All of the trim levels are negative numbers, but nothing going right down to negative 12. Shouldn't be anything to worry about there, right?
Totally fine.
For the speaker crossovers, it set his front, left, and right towers to full range, his center to 40 hertz, his surrounds to 60 hertz, his top fronts, which are Martin Logan Motion 2i satellites mounted to the ceiling at 110 hertz, which perfectly matches their specs, but his top rears, also Martin Logan 2i speakers, got set to 150. He followed our advice and manually changed the 5 floor level speakers all to 80 hertz since the auto setup set them lower, while leaving the overheads at 110 and 150 respectively. From his limited time listening, it seems to all sound great, but should he have any concern about how the crossovers were set or anything else about his Audyssey setup? So the ones in the back is probably a microphone thing,
or a reflection
would be
thing.
My guess.
Yeah.
I mean, if it really bothers you that it's 115 instead of 110, I think you could just bump it down to 110 and call it a day.
For Atmos speakers, the chances of you noticing are slim to none.
Yeah. You didn't say that you set everything to small, but I'm assuming.
Well, yeah. Once you move that crossover up, it does that, so that's okay. Yeah.
But nothing here sounds off base to me.
There's nothing in those settings that gave me pause or made me, crinkle my forehead and go, why would it have done such a thing? Very expected results from having run Audyssey. We would expect it to nail the distance and trim levels. And then, yes, unfortunately, if your speakers are capable of playing lower, it tends to err on the side of setting them to a lower than 80 hertz crossover. And so you've followed our advice and done everything correctly. Once you do make and install your corner bass traps, you need to run it again. And you might discover that the top rear speakers end up with a different setting once you run it a second time and have those corner bass traps installed. If it does that, don't go freaking out thinking that there's a malfunction or something. It's entirely possible that will take place, and you definitely want to run it again regardless once you install new absorption in your room.
Right. So watching some movies via streaming, he thinks he spotted the odd glitch in the video here and there, usually in the dark parts of the image, sometimes even in the black bar at the bottom. Is that because of low bandwidth? Probably.
I mean, it's because of compression.
It could be the transfer. It could be the original. We watched 28 Days Later on Amazon Prime, which we usually get pristine video from, but that movie, I swear, looks like they shot it with a camcorder. It's so bad.
They kind of did. 28 Days Later was kind of shot on like TV8.
Yeah, it was very, very low res.
Yeah.
So yes, and again, I've said this many times before, but one of my favorite movies is Dread, and some of those scenes, I swear they were like, yeah, that didn't turn out so good, but we don't have any more money,
Right.
so we're just going to use it. So some of those scenes are filmed really poorly. So yes, it is probably the bandwidth, but it could also.
I mean,
be
it's not even
transferred, or the
necessarily
original.
like bandwidth. It's just like, what they're sending you is compressed. It is compressed
Yes.
video. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. All of the streaming services are sending you compressed video that is more heavily compressed than on an Ultra HD Blu-ray. The bit rate is lower, and it is more heavily compressed to take up less data. So when you do that, like one example that immediately sprung to mind for me, by and large, Disney Plus quality is pretty good. Most of that quality is pretty good, but like I was taking a look at X-Men Days of Future Past, and near the beginning there's a scene where the camera kind of swoops through a big hole in a building that's been blown in a building, and so of course it's all shadowy in there, and I was like, oh, is that a macro blocky mess? And like, it didn't matter how many times I let it buffer and went back and reran over. It's like, nah, that's just what the signal was sent. It was a macro blocky mess in there. So if that's the type of stuff you're seeing, and yes, that can sometimes exist in the black bars, because the black bars are encoded as well. They are, compressed and encoded, and sometimes you'll notice like this big old macro block that shows up in the black bar of a CinemaScope aspect ratio movie. And yeah, when you're streaming, sometimes that stuff is just there. It's why the absolute purists, the people who demand the absolute best quality possible, will still, fight tooth and nail that discs are the only way to go. But yeah, that's not to be unexpected.
There's something to be said for
Sure.
it. I think did I publish an article on that this week? I don't remember. I wrote one about discs or digital,
Right.
and there's something to be said for if you want to have the absolute best quality, but if you bought the absolute best quality of Thor
Right.
Ragnarok,
Oh yeah, you did put that up there, yeah.
You are going to be disappointed because it sucks. It's terrible. I don't ever watch it because I stream it because it's better streamed because of audio is better.
Sure.
But
And it should be noted, even discs are not necessarily flawless. I mean, disc video and audio is still compressed. It's not as though that is raw, uncompressed data on there. That would take up terabytes. So yeah, it's not necessarily flawless on disc either. And I mean, here's the thing. This is his first time watching things on a completely blacked out room on an OLED. Yeah, you're going to see every flaw that's possible now, unfortunately. It's not going to smooth anything over for you.
When we went from SD to HD and HD to 4K, one of the things that people are concerned about is these older movies,
right.
and stuff is that when you get these higher resolutions, the stuff that was basically it wasn't visible or noticeable because of the resolution now is
right.
I mean, the makeup is bad, the special effects look horrible. You can see things you really weren't meant to see because everyone knew you couldn't see it with the older technology. But now we've got this newer technology, and they're like, well, let's just re-encode it. We'll take the original master and we'll re-encode it with this 4K. You're like, ugh.
My favorite are the old TV shows that actually did have junk things, sometimes even the camera or the boom in the very edges of the picture,
right.
because all TVs back in the day had overscan. All of them cropped off a little bit of the outside edges, but it was there in the original master, but they just counted on the fact that all CRT TVs were cropping off a little bit of the edges, and now when they remaster it and put it on Blu-ray or something like that, it's like, oh, why is like the edge of the camera lens visible on the right-hand side of the screen? I love that stuff.
So he's got his NVIDIA Shield Pro. He went with it mostly because we've always said it's the best choice for Plex, but he intended to use it for the rest of his streaming services. But his LG CX has all the same apps available, and it is outputting 4K Dolby Vision and Atmos. So what's the benefit to using the NVIDIA Shield Pro? Convenience of not having to go through the app stuff on the TV. I don't know. Nothing really. I mean, so it really depends app to app, okay?
A bit.
Some apps.
There's one kind of blanket answer I can give on it, though.
Okay. But when somebody asks me, which device should I use? The answer is almost certainly, what apps are you going to use? Because some apps will be better on some devices than other devices. We've talked about that quite a bit. But What's your blanket answer?
Yeah, just to mention, JR had the same question, but regarding the Apple TV 4K instead of the NVIDIA Shield. But he also has his C10 OLED. He's like, why should I use the Apple TV instead of the built-in apps? So the blanket answer is none of the built-in apps on the LG C10 OLED switch to 24 hertz for movies and TV. It leaves it all at 60 hertz. So you get some judder. If you use the built-in apps, it doesn't switch you over to the 24 hertz or the very specific 23.976 hertz. So if you care about switching frame rates and eliminating judder from your movie and TV sources, then that's where these external devices can give you that advantage. In the case of the Apple TV 4K, it does the best job of automatically switching frame rates as long as you turn on the match frame rate feature of the Apple TV 4K. In the case of the NVIDIA Shield, it does not automatically switch frame rates, but it is the one device out there where you can manually lock it to 23.976 hertz, or you actually gives you the option to lock it to the integer 24 hertz too if you want to. The other ones, you can lock them at 60, but you can't lock them at 24. The NVIDIA Shield is one of the few that lets you lock it at 24. So frame rates is the answer why you would still use an external device. The built-in apps don't do the switching frame rates. I will say, though, for both the NVIDIA Shield and the Apple TV 4K, neither of those is the best choice for YouTube. Neither of them will output HDR of any kind from YouTube, whereas the built-in YouTube app of your LG OLED TV will let you output HDR from YouTube. So specifically for YouTube, you probably want to use the built-in app because very few things are 24 hertz on YouTube.
Have ever watched anything on YouTube that I would have thought would have HDR?
Some things do.
You know what I mean? I'm sure they do, but I don't think I've ever watched anything on YouTube that would.
All
right, lastly, JR booted up his Apple TV 4K and right away it asked him if he wants to enable Dolby Vision. So, of course, he said yes, which we have just talked about this in the past. Now, his LG's picture mode never changes whenever he's using his Apple TV. It always says it's in Dolby Vision cinema mode. Are there any drawbacks? There are. And we've talked about them, but basically, you wanted put it in the lowest setting. Is that right, Rob?
Yeah, 4K SDR as the default.
Yeah. And then it'll adjust itself up when needed, but it will not default to Dolby Vision all the time.
As long as you activate the match dynamic range feature, which does not automatically turn itself on. You have to manually go in there. So once again, I have a YouTube link. There's like a 5-minute video that some guys in the UK put out that just runs through the Apple TV 4K settings, and they get it correct. So I have no problem linking you to their settings. Again, that link will be in the show notes, and it's not a long video, so it's easy to get through. So I mean, the thing is, if you're watching like an SDR movie or an SDR TV show from the Apple TV 4K and you've set it where it asks you, do you want to enable Dolby Vision? And you said yes, and now it's stuck in Dolby Vision all the time. It actually does a pretty good job of converting the SDR color and dynamic range into a Dolby Vision container without making it look all weird. So it's not like the worst thing in the world. To me, the menus look weird when they're stuck in Dolby Vision all the time, but that's not the end of the world. Your menus aren't what you're watching the majority of the time. So there's not like a huge drawback to leaving it that way, but if you want the most accurate, then you'll set it to 4K SDR as the default and activate match dynamic range.
All right, finally done with those gentlemen. Nathan enjoyed our discussion about using mono listening test versus stereo to evaluate speakers, but having read Dr. Floyd Toole's book, Sound Reproduction, Nathan fears we might have oversimplified.
It is true. We did not go through the lengths to which Dr. Floyd Toole wrote in an entire book. That is true.
Right. Shockingly enough.
No argument.
And if I had a middle name that was different than my actual middle name, oversimplify would probably be it. Because that is me. Or exaggerate. Depends on if you talk to my wife or not. So he sent along excerpts in which Dr. Toole describes not only his own reasoning and experience running listening tests and experiments, but also Sean Olive's and other researchers. In summary, they never came across a scenario in an experiment in which participants responded differently to any specific attributes of a speaker's performance in stereo versus mono. In any comparisons of different speaker models, if a speaker won a head-to-head comparison in stereo for a specific attribute, then it also won in mono. This even applied to imaging. as they found it depended more on what is in the recording itself than the interaction between a pair of stereo speakers. However, Dr. Toole also notes that as they went from mono to stereo to multi-channel, participants described less and less of a discernible difference between various speakers. In other words, they might strongly indicate a difference when hearing them in mono, but they indicate only a slight difference when hearing them in stereo. And then they might not indicate any difference at all when hearing speakers in multi-channel. So for experimentation purposes, they settled on mono because the results never disagreed with stereo or multi-channel results, and participants were able to discern the greatest differences when listening in mono, while stereo and multi-channel listening seemed to mask those differences. So with that in mind, could we revisit the topic? No. Sorry, next question. If professional reviewers are attempting to evaluate and make comparisons, doesn't it make sense, based on this research, to rely on mono instead of stereo? Okay, so this is a case where something might be technically right and also be completely useless. Okay, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. No, because as much as this may be this might be correct in that I can discern more differences in mono versus stereo, blah, 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 blah. When you are writing a review, if you write a review and say that all you did was listen in mono, you cannot, no one will, the first question everybody will have is, did you listen to them in stereo? How did they image? How did they do these other things? You will not be able to get away from having to listen to them in stereo, or having to describe that part, because people will not understand it or believe it. Basically is what it comes down to. We don't use this term anymore, but face validity is something we used to talk about, which is just at first blush, does it make sense? Does it seem like a valid thing? We don't really talk about face validity anymore in psychology, but this is a case where face validity has a big component in this, because people will not be able to understand that what you are talking about. I mean, they won't buy it. And I think there's good reason. I mean,
that said, I don't think our answer from last time is drastically changed. Where I'm in favor, like if we're talking about reviewers using this research and applying it, I'm in favor of do them both. Because I mean, sure. I don't disagree or really strongly question the findings that Dr. Toole described in his book. Like they ran the experiments, have done so more than I have done on a personal basis or anything like that. And, sure. All the statistical data is there. And they're like, look, the mono listening test, not only did it never disagree with the stereo, so it's not as though we're worried about missing something, by doing it in stereo only, but it revealed greater differences than doing it in stereo. So it makes sense that experimentation-wise, comparison-wise, even review-wise, they are making the case. I agree with you. They're making the case that review-wise, it does make sense to do the evaluation in mono. But as Tom just described, for the purposes of the reader and helping the reader, I think doing both makes sense. Because I
Sure.
also think, even if we're talking about face validity, I don't think there's very many people who would say, if you said to them, look, if I just want to focus on a critical detail, a specific aspect of the performance, I was able to hear it more clearly and easily doing one speaker at a time. I think a lot of people would just hear that and go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like there's not the interaction, there's not as much distraction, so you can key in on that one thing. So I think that makes sense, but I would, as a reviewer, encourage doing both. Now, the thing is, I want to take the whole conversation of this and almost flip it 180, because to me, and this lines up completely with my own experience, I think where AVRant as a podcast or a YouTube video, where we come at things a little bit differently, is Tom and I have both gone through the experience of starting out being super gung-ho, wanting to learn everything we can, wanting to listen to everything we can, wanting to get hypercritical, then questioning ourselves, like, did I really hear that difference? What if I compare these two speakers that I was pretty darn sure are different, but I do it blind and I can't hear the difference? Oh my God, what does that mean? And going through that worry, right. And then getting into like the really nitty-gritty and then reading all the research and being like, oh, if we're going to detect these differences, what does the setup have to be? We have to start getting into anechoic chambers. We have to compare the objective measurements. We have to do all the tests blind and then getting through all of that and coming out and going, gosh, when I listen to all these speakers blind, there aren't as big differences as I thought there were. That's the end result, is that ultimately things don't sound as different as we worry they will, or think they should, or are concerned that we aren't going to detect. Like, at the end of it all, we aren't as good at hearing things as we often imagine ourselves to be or attach our egos to. And so what I find most interesting is, we said this before, but in a different context. How many people are listening to just one speaker all the time? Like, very few. Most people are listening to at least two speakers, and then, of course, on a home theater-centric area, most of us are listening to multiple speakers. And this research saying, hey, as soon as you add even one more speaker and make it a 2-channel setup, a lot of the differences that you could hear in mono, you can't hear them anymore. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So if we think about it from that side of things, it's like, wait a second, in real-world application, it's not even that we're not as critical as we think we are. It's like we literally can't hear some of the stuff that people worry about. And we're not disparaging anybody who does, because we absolutely went through it, and we know what you're going through, and we know the excitement of it, and we know the trepidation about it. But we can promise you, like, once you've been listening long enough, you're like, man, a lot of stuff that I worried about just doesn't really matter that much.
Well, okay, so the other part of this. Now, Rob said about listening to one speaker to try to discern like some specific characteristics of it. Sure, that makes sense. But mostly what Dr. Toole was talking about, at least based on what we were just discussing, is comparing speakers.
A lot of it, yeah.
And we don't often really want to do that as reviewers. We don't want to sit there. We aren't given multiple speakers and say, compare these and tell me which one is best. Because what you end up with is one speaker manufacturer that's very happy and all the rest of them hate you. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to listen to a speaker and give you some objective, at least, or subjective, and hopefully both, evaluations of its performance and as it stands alone, not in comparison to everything else that we've ever heard or that we have online. So yes, you may be able to pick up the differences between two speakers better by listening to one versus stereo or whatever, but that's not what we want to do anyways. And it's simply a matter of financials. You just can't go around pissing off everybody. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do anybody else any good. And all it does is start a bunch of fights online, because people react really well when you tell them that something else is better than what they spent their hard.
I just found it so amusing that I've definitely come across the conversations where people have they both read the same book. They both read Sound Reproduction by Dr. Floyd Toole, and so people are like, they take the exact same sentences, what he's written, and they're like, see, this is evidence why, if we're going to detect all these critical differences, this is what we need to do, and these are the way we need to come at it, and these are the metrics we need to measure. And then I'm coming at it from the complete opposite. I'm like, yeah, look at how we actually use speakers. Most of us have multi-channel setups when we're in home theater, and he's saying, yeah, if you do, you can't hear the differences anyway, so maybe don't worry about it so much.
Yeah. Once you take your ego out of buying speakers, and the way you do that is you don't pay for them. Okay? That's what the reviewer has over every other, that the professional reviewer has over everybody else, is we didn't pay for them and we're not keeping them. Right? They're not going to stay in this house. Like, I've got $3,300 pair of speakers right now that I'm reviewing for AV Gadgets. I have no ego invested in these things. I could care less. Right? I don't care if they're good or they're bad. I didn't pay for them. I didn't spend if I spent $3,000 of my own money in these things, you better believe that I have ego invested in me not having, because what ends up happening, and I actually wrote an article about this, but I haven't published it yet because I don't know how it fits into my into my website. But I wrote an article about the psychology of sound, basically, of home theater. And you get so invested psychologically in buying when you put out that outlay of money, because if you spent money and then you decide that what you spent money on isn't a good thing, then not only do you have to admit that you wasted the money, but that you were a fool to have wasted such money.
Which we don't agree with. We don't think that at all.
Right. No, but I mean, that's sort of in the background of your mind, what's going on, why people get so angry when you say that my speakers are better than yours, or that there's another speaker that came out that's better, or another subwoofer that's better, people get so angry. It's because you not only are you saying you wasted your money, but you were stupid to have made this decision to waste this money. And the psychology behind that is that's where the reviewer comes in. Is the reviewer's like, I didn't spend any money on these things, and I'm not going to spend any money on these things. And if I really liked them, I could buy them, but I'm not gonna. So I can send these things back.
It's why I'm such a fan of blind listening, because the biggest value to me in all the blind listening that I did is it's such a humbling experience. It's so humbling because you go, oh man, it turns out that when I'm not looking at it and I don't know what I'm listening to, there's a whole bunch I don't detect.
And I've said this many times on this podcast before, and I'll continue to say it. I have been in blind listening tests with people who had already heard some of the speakers and liked them, and were convinced that the ones that they liked were the ones that won. Sure. And then when we revealed the results, they themselves had liked a different speaker more than the speaker they had liked. And then within 24 hours, I get emails and calls and stuff telling me why it was that they were mistaken, and that the ones that they liked before the test started really were the ones that won.
Or that the blind test you ran must have been flawed. It's your fault.
Well, yeah, no one said that, because my tests are not flawed, but but they did come up with lots of other excuses, listener fatigue, so where they were sitting, and a bunch of, and once they got them home and listened to them again, it was clear that they were the winner, whatever. So that ego, you got to get out, get that ego out of it. All right, I know we've got way off topic here, so let's go on. Mark came across an ad while he was browsing Audio Gone. It wasn't a listing. Actually, it was a pop-up ad. He wants to be super clear. As soon as he read it, he could only laugh, to the point that he figured it had to be a leftover April Fool's joke that someone forgot to take down, but it's still online. They even have a YouTube video about it with comments turned off for probably obvious reasons. It's from High Fidelity Cables, except they literally show the word cables in their own logo crossed out and replaced below with the word magnets. And they are selling a 3 milliliter bottle of liquid for $600. Okay. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of text saying how this NPS 1260 liquid is 3-dimensionality enhancer. A 3-dimensionality enhancer?
That is what they call it. I can't make it up.
Apparently, you put drops of it on your speaker binding post as they compare it to contact enhancers, but claim that the liquid is dramatically different because the inventor has a fundamentally different way of thinking about how energy transfers, teaching that this has more to do with the power of magnetism and less to do with the actual electron.
Just one of them. The singular electron that transfers all power in the universe.
Just the one. So Mark asked if this was a joke. He can't tell. It can't be a real product, can it? He generally wants our help in figuring out what's going on with this nonsense. What's going on is that, first of all, if you're not on the website, if you're not on the YouTube video, I don't know if we're going to link this thing up. I guess we are. But one of the things that you'll always find whenever you find a really high-end audio product that is, obviously snake oil, which this obviously is, what you'll find is a massive wall of text behind it, and I mean, to explain.
It is a wall of text. It's not that long, though. Yeah,
it's not that long, but it's a little bottle of liquid. So how long can it be? So what they do is they keep shoving words at you until your brain says, well, I've read so much about this. Some of it must be true.
And how could they charge this much if it didn't do anything?
Right. So what's going on here, Mark, is if they sell one bottle, they made a lot of money. So
I mean, it's probably,
they don't have to sell a massive amount. They have to sell just a little bit, and it's all profit.
It's probably literally like a little dropper of isopropyl alcohol, so that it can't do anything. It'll just evaporate on contact. It won't harm anything. Although who knows? Right. Who knows? Maybe it's something that actually is harmful for all we know, because
could be radioactive for all we know.
Lord only knows what was going on. So anyway, I mean, I don't think it's an April Fool's joke. It is still there. The YouTube video is still up. I think this is sadly a thing someone genuinely could buy. So yeah, I don't think it's like literally that kind of joke. It's it's a joke in the does this have any value sense, where we say, is this a useful product? No, it's a joke, man. In that way, it's a joke, but I don't think it's an intentional joke. I think it is meant to defraud people out of their money. So
it is exactly that, yes. And there's a lot of snake oil out there, and this is just one of the many pieces.
Guess
of
what?
it.
All other contact enhancers are too.
I was I just remember one time I was at a friend's house helping them. He one of his speakers wasn't working. He couldn't figure out why. So I looked behind his receiver, and of course one of the wires is not connected. He goes, "Oh, I checked that. Oh no, it was connected before." I take it out. He's got like a 1/4 inch, maybe less, of wire exposed. I'm like, man, what are you doing? He goes, "Oh, it was working fine before." I'm like, okay, just expose more of the wire. How hard is this? You just electrical contact. Hey, if you want to know how easy it is to make an electrical contact, unplug one of your anythings from the wall just a little bit and get your finger close. Like, you don't even have to touch it. Just get close to those prongs and see how easy electricity conducts without any enhancers on it. And no magnets required. Jeff has written to us with possibly the most open-ended question ever. This is a very long open-ended question. He is building an addition to his house. He hasn't given any restrictions. This addition is 100% from the ground up, and he didn't provide any budget for the construction itself. He says he only says he has about $40,000 in mind for the home theater equipment and seating. He knows he wants 2 rows of seats, 7 seats in total, 3 front, 4 in the back, and he wants Atmos, most likely a 7.2.4. $40,000. You're giving 7.6 for 2.6.
You can go for it. You can go through $40,000 pretty easily. So
yeah. 7.2.4 configuration. This is an investment in his retirement, which is still 7 to 10 years away at this point. So where does he even start? He figures he should have room dimensions to aim for, but then immediately jump to asking about equipment recommendations and screen size options. So addition to a house being planned, absolutely nothing done yet, building this addition from scratch, and he wants to include a dedicated theater. What help can we provide? Well, I mean, okay, so I'll tell you, if I was building something from scratch, for the first thing I would consider doing is building a room within a room, so to have complete sound isolation for the rest of the house.
I wanted to address that right away, because so here's the thing. We are at this point, we're happy to get into it a little bit later. I'm very glad that you gave an overall description of just the sort of general setup that you want, because that is important. But what we want you to focus on right now, because you're still very much in the planning stage, is the room. We want you to focus on the room, the specific speakers and projector and all that. We can get to that later, because, hey, if you don't actually install any of that for 2 to 3 years, which very well might be the case, there's no point in us recommending you specific equipment today. Because,
in fact, this is a bad time to buy gear anyways.
Sure.
So
the general...
I think in a couple of years, we're going to have better displays. Yeah. We're going to have receivers that have the right number of inputs and outputs.
So I do that you have the general idea of you want about this size, you want about this many seats, you want this sort of speaker configured. That's great, because that really is important for planning the room. But we want to focus entirely on the room right now. So what Tom was saying about, room within a room, which is you have basically like an outer shell, and then the actual interior walls that you see inside your theater, they are physically separated from that outer shell, which forms the exterior of your building. But I did want to address immediately the idea that if this is an addition, so this isn't being built inside of your existing basement or something like that, we sort of have to figure, well, that might give you the option of not having a lot of shared wall space with your current house, which might mean you don't have to do quite as much soundproofing. Like, if it doesn't matter that maybe a little bit of sound leaks to the outside wall, because if this is a completely detached house and you have some acreage and your neighbor isn't going to worry, then, maybe we don't have to do a 100% room within a room.
Sure. Yeah.
But what I wanted to address right away is the idea, this is an addition. He didn't say it's a single room that he's adding on. It's like an entire addition to the house.
Right.
And if that's the case, one of the things I like in I can plan this theater right from the ground up, is the idea of having the door that comes into the theater on the back wall, like right in the middle of the back wall. having the door there. And I would probably go for a double door so that I can actually have both of those doors acoustically treated. It makes it a little easier to put acoustic treatment on a double door. But the idea that, let's say, the door that goes from your existing house into the addition, I would have that open into a room that is not your theater. And then from that room, it opens into your theater. So you basically have like a room in between your existing house and the theater. An antechamber, if you want to think of it that way, but it could just be a lobby, or maybe that's the bit of a hallway that leads to whatever other rooms are in this addition. The whole thing I'm getting at, though, is just that if you have that bit of a separation, the door from your existing house into a room, and then from that room into the theater, then we don't have, we don't have to go insane with the soundproofing.
You do want to do some, though.
Definitely.
So there is a, essentially what was my back porch when this house at some point had a back porch, was screened in at one point, and then they added it on to the house. So it's an addition. So it's the entire length of the house between my door and the door to my bedroom. They're directly across from each other. But there's just this big open space here. It is not quiet enough that I can sit in here and blast the home theater and not disturb my wife at night, because last night she came in and told me it was too loud when I was watching Terminator Dark Fate. So that's, if you want to be able to watch this thing in your retirement as loud as you want, you are going to want to think about some soundproofing and some sound deadening to keep that theater. Now, if it's all the way across the house from the rest, I mean, if there's going to be this anteroom that he's talking about, and then there's the kitchen living room area, and then there's the bedrooms at the back or whatever, but then maybe you don't have to worry so much about it. But I would plan on doing some just to make sure. I
mean, the thing is, if you want to keep this simple, and I'm assuming you're hiring a contractor to do this construction. I don't know, maybe he is the contractor and he's retiring from construction business. He's doing himself, but something that is really quite simple that any contractor will be able to handle and not screw up is to just have staggered studs. That is the simplest thing that you can request, because it is a bit more money and it does take up a little bit more square footage than just, single stud 2x4 construction. But any contractor can do staggered stud construction. It's not requiring any special skills. The amount of space that you're losing to it square footage wise is it's something, but it's not drastic. And that can be enough where, again, it's the entire idea that the external walls are not attached to the same studs as the interior drywall. We want those things physically separated, and that provides a remarkable amount of soundproofing for very little effort if you just do staggered studs. So that is something you can say right away.
Yeah. And then, going forward, you'll need to be aware of what you're planning on putting in this theater and how you want it to look. If you want to do, that nice clean look with in walls everywhere and that sort of thing, that's going to affect your soundproofing as well. So, keep that in mind, of what you're actually going to end up doing on that front. Of course, the easiest way to not have sound leak out is not to cut any holes in your wall. So, start with that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the planning of how you're going to get your HVAC into and back out of the theater, that is definitely a concern. Now, again, one of the reasons why I like that double door on the back wall is there will be some space above that door to the ceiling, and that can be the location where all things go into and out of this theater, is on that back wall that goes into your antechamber of a room in between your house and the actual theater. And that limits the exposure. You're not having holes cut in the walls that are leaking everywhere. And you can even baffle and insulate that whole area to really keep noise transition to a minimum by basically having that one area where your things go into.
If he's adding more rooms in this addition, they're almost certainly going to be bedrooms, right?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know. He didn't give in details.
So you got to consider all of that too. So I don't know we need more information.
Yeah,
but
it was a very short email.
I think that what we're both saying here is we could give you dimensions and all that other stuff.
I would like to give some dimensions, because that would help in just the planning. So
and these would be interior dimensions. So in order to we're going to make some assumptions about how big of a screen size you want. You know, in my mind, I'm always shooting for a 120 inch screen in a situation like this. That's because it's readily available. Mm-hmm. It's almost any projector that you can buy on the market will easily light it up, and you're not going to be buying something custom. Basically, you won't have to buy something custom.
And if you do want to position your speakers around a 120-inch screen, it's not so large that it's going to force your center speaker to the floor. You know, you can do it quite easily.
So in my mind, I would have the interior dimensions as such so that I could have a false wall with a acoustically transparent screen, 120 inches, all the speakers behind it, which we don't have to worry about which speakers there are, and a subwoofer back there, and then the 2 rows of seats. And I think 7.2.4 is completely doable in a space like this.
Absolutely.
So again, there's an article on AV Gadgets because we talked about it a bunch here, so I just wrote it up. You know, a little bit in front of your front row, a little bit behind your back row for your top rears and top fronts, and Bob's your uncle there. So what's the dimension?
I'll give you some range of dimensions because I don't know exactly how much space you have to work with. I would say for the theater that he described, 7 seats, 2 rows of seats, going for, like he was saying, maybe around a 135-inch screen. I'm like, yeah, that's not completely unreasonable, especially if you do acoustically transparent and you have your center speaker behind the screen. 135 can work, and the better projectors can light up 135 quite nicely. So I would be totally okay with that screen size. That lets you sit a very comfortable about 12 feet from eyes to screen if you're 135. So a lot of stuff works nicely in there. If you were to go for that sort of screen size and you have the available space that your interior dimensions can do this, if you can do 17 by, now this is like the actual physical walls, back wall to front wall, 17 by 25, because that gives you a nice ample 2.5, 3 feet of false wall space.
Yeah.
So
3 feet from the actual wall to the false wall, and then 12 feet to you.
Yeah. And then 6 feet between the rows, and that leaves you a nice 4 feet behind the back row, which you can have your doors on that back wall, and you have 4 feet of space to come in. And then 17 feet wide means you got nice walkways on both sides of the 4 seats at the back. You can easily enter and walk around, and it feels theater-like because it's a bit spacious, right? So that's on the high end. For what you've described, 17 by 25 is the high end. Now, for what you described, if you shrink the screen size a bit, maybe you don't do acoustically transparent, you go to 110 or 120 inches, and you have that on the physical front wall with the speakers around it instead of behind it. You could go as small, theoretically, you could go as narrow as 13 feet. That wouldn't be super comfortable. I'd want 15.
I wouldn't
15 is about the minimum I would aim for. So 15 feet wide, 17 wide feels spacious and comfortable. And then about 21 feet long is about the minimum that I would aim for building this room. So so if you did like 16 by 23, could be very comfortable, but 17 by 25 is what I'll try to aim for.
All right. And that's interior dimensions. So if you decide to do the staggered studs, and if you want to do two layers of drywall with green glue and all that other stuff, then that subtracts from that. So make sure that the interior dimensions would be that, and you have to. That's why you plan the soundproofing first, like what you're going to do for soundproofing first, so that you'll know what the interior dimensions will actually be after you do all the things. Mike would like to add speakers throughout his home for a whole house audio. He is not looking to install in-ceiling speakers all over the place. Standalone wireless speakers are more what he has in mind. He does not want it all controlled by a voice assistant. He's happy using AirPlay or something similar where he selects what he wants to play on his phone or tablet and then selects the room or rooms where he wants to play it. There's only one room in which he wants something to be a bit special with a focus on sound quality. What is that? Okay. But for the rest of the rooms, they don't need to be anything stellar, just easy to use and not more trouble than they're worth. Should he dive into Sonos, or is there another wireless whole house audio system we would think would be better for him? And what about that one room where he'll do some critical listening? He was thinking maybe a pair of KEF LS50 wireless or LSX speakers, but what do we think? I would look at the DTS Play-Fi, if that's still a thing. Okay. I think it's still a thing. DTS Play-Fi has a number of different speakers and things that are out there that you can use. I've used it before. You can once you get them all connected to your Wi-Fi, they're very easy to use, and you can group them into different groups, and you can have many groups that have different speaker configurations. So you can have all the speakers in one group when you're doing whole house audio. You can have, just your one group that is maybe your LS speakers that you're talking about. Maybe there's the bedroom groups. There's the everything but the bedrooms group. You know what I mean? So the speakers can be reconfigured in a number of different ways, and then you can play different sources to each of the groups or share sources within the groups, and by sources I mean streaming services, and they're almost you control it through your phone and stuff like that. So I would look at DTS Play-Fi. I've used it before. I've liked it. The speakers I've had that have come with it installed have not all been fantastic, but they you can find some out there that are better.
Well, we can note that DTS Play-Fi is what SVS uses for their Prime wireless speakers. So their Prime wireless speakers and their Prime wireless sound base, those are DTS Play-Fi. So that is certainly an option. I was going to come at it, Mike, from the point of view of, do you already have any surround sound setups in your house? And if so, are you already using Denon or Marantz, or are you maybe already using Yamaha? Because to me, if you already have surround sound and you already have any of those brand of AV receivers, if you already got Denon or Marantz, I would definitely look at Hios, because they have a complete suite of products.
Sure.
And that way you could bring in what you already own and then expand on that with Hios, because Denon and Marantz, Hios is what they use. If you already own a Yamaha, then MusicCast is a great system. And again, they have the whole range of products where you can put MusicCast speakers or Hios speakers in any of the rooms where, the sound quality doesn't have to be absolute tip-top. For that one room where you care a lot about the critical listening, I would probably consider whatever one of these ecosystems you choose. All of them offer a wireless amplifier, right? It's a thing that connects to your network, and then it just has amplification for a pair of speakers. And all of them, in these cases, offer a subwoofer output on that wireless amp, whichever one it is. So there's the Hios amp, the Sonos amp, the MusicCast amp, or like we mentioned, SVS has their Prime wireless sound base. And all of those have a subwoofer output and amplification for a pair of speakers. And then you can choose any pair of regular speakers that you wanted, and you can add a subwoofer, and that's instead of what I'm getting at is I'm not sure I would want the wireless speakers in the critical listening room to be a separate system from everything else.
Right.
Why make it a separate system? What if I want to play the same sound out of that room too? So
and there's so I'm looking at the Play-Fi products page, and there's everything from your hotel to Klipsch on here, and just tons of things. Yeah. So you've got lots and lots of options. If you decided to go Sonos, sure,
that too,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely not. And it is a very user-friendly system, definitely.
It is. If you decide to go into Sonos, because you are going to be paying a lot for the name,
sure,
because it's been around for a long time, and but that when you go into that ecosystem, to me, what I tell myself when I'm buying something like this is part of the reason I'm paying extra. Yes, there is a name brand recognition, but there's also, they've just been improving this product over the years, and that user interface is what you're really paying for. So, the Play-Fi is good. I like it. It's certainly not as I would experiment with it. I will put it to you that way. All these things, you can just, like anything else, if you're going to be the one using it and the only one using it, well, then you just choose the one that seems that it makes sense and is the least expensive one for you. If you got a bunch of other people who are going to be using it too, you might want to get some input from them so they can figure it out. Because my wife never did figure out Play-Fi, even though it wasn't for lack of intelligence. It was just she didn't want to.
To me, the absolute easiest ones to use, just on what do I press and is it obvious what I should press on my smartphone app, to me the two easiest are Sonos and MusicCast. So if you need to narrow it down, and that's the priority, is the absolute easiest to use, I would probably put those two ahead. And yeah, like I say, for that one critical music listening room, I would get whatever amp works with that ecosystem, and then you can audition a bunch of bookshelf speakers to your heart's content.
There you go. Yeah. Andrew took our advice. He found another pair of KEF LS50 speakers on sale. Now he and his wife don't have to keep stealing their first pair back and forth between the theater and her office, and they don't have to compromise by putting them in the living room where neither of them gets to use them full time, so balance is restored.
Hooray!
Yeah.
Congrats.
In the theater, Andrew says he does not need an external amplifier. He knows this, but that doesn't matter. He wants one, and he can afford it, so what should he get? He mostly likes the idea of powering his front three speakers. He's leaning towards a Outlaw Model 5000X because he likes the way it looks. It doesn't seem, and it doesn't seem like a completely crazy overpriced edition. What do we think? I think that this conversation is moot because you've already bought a 5-channel amp. That's what I think. I think you already now own a 5-channel amp because that's how these things. No one can sit there and stare at a 3-channel amp and go, but it's only $200 more for the 5-channel. It's only $500 more for the 5-channel. I mean, you can't do it. You can't do it. You do it. You're going to buy the 5-channel. So, Outlaw's fine. Emotive is fine. I would, if it were me right now, I would probably go the monoliths.
Yeah, I think monoprice monolith
are good.
I know.
And if I had money to burn, and I'd go ATI.
Sure.
Basically.
Which we should note, ATI makes the monoprice monolith amplifiers for them. They are the OEM.
And that's why I would go with the monolith. Yes, that's why I would go with them. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there. I mean, you know me, because here's the thing. If you're like, look, I know I don't need an amp, but I'm going to get one because I just want one. And hey, I got no problem with that.
I got no problem with that.
Because he's going in eyes open. That's what we care about. We don't want you going in thinking this is going to be some, like going to deliver things that it isn't going to deliver. That's fine. You got your eyes open. We got no problem with that. It's almost jewelry at this point. But if you're going to do it, I'm like, why not get the one where blind, you actually might be able to detect a little difference. Now, it's going to be at the quietest, essentially the system running idle is where you might notice the noise floor difference. And then, if you absolutely crank your system, then hey, it's got wattage for days. So, I'm going to say monoprice monolith. If we're going to do this, let's do this. Let's go nuts. And, nuts within reason. There you go. If you get the Outlaw, you did great. If you got the Outlaw, you did great.
You already bought the amp. I don't even know why you're talking to us. Patricio is a bit surprised by how much he is liking the little $65 Fosse Class D amp. What has struck him most is how it barely generates any heat, which is what Class Ds do. By comparison, it's easy to feel the heat coming off of his Marantz SR6012 receiver. It's because it's not just doing the one thing. It's doing a bunch of stuff. If he swaps things around and uses a little Fosse amp to power his front, left, and right, it seems to have plenty of power, and it sounds just as good as the Class AB amps built into his Marantz, so it's got him wondering.
Was that from your end?
Is there a semi going through my
that was a big noise that even came through my earphones. Usually noise on your end doesn't come through my earphones.
What is happening? Okay, so there's three big construction projects that are going on right now in my neighborhood, but they have across the street from my house, there's like this empty. There used to be a house there, and they knocked it down, and now there's just an empty lot. Well, they have turned that into a staging area. Okay. So they have this big fence over there, and there's sometimes like massive, I don't know, bulldozers, front end loaders. I don't know what you call them, just like driving by my house. So, okay, that must have been what it was. So in terms of pure audio quality, are Class D amps right up there with Class AB now? If not, why not? Class D amps are harder to keep linear at the full frequency response. 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. It's hard to keep a Class D amp completely linear throughout that. That's why Class Ds have been mostly relegated to subwoofer duty, because they give out a lot of power. They don't waste a lot in heat, which is why you are noticing how cool this thing runs. But it is hard to keep that amp linear throughout the entire frequency response.
Particularly when impedance of the load changes, and that's the real key. Right.
So why don't we use them? I'll be honest, the only time I ever heard a difference between amps was when I was comparing a Class AB to a Class D. And it was significantly obvious that, it was not a subtle difference between the two. And there was nothing wrong with the Class D amp. It just was being asked to do something it wasn't very good at. So, do I think the $65 Fosse amp is linear throughout the entire frequency range? That's probably not.
I mean, it can be, because here's the thing. A lot of this depends on what speakers you're connecting it to, because some speakers have a pretty darn stable impedance from top to bottom. And
so if you've got speakers like that, then you might not be hearing much of a difference.
In that case, the Class D amp is going to perform really, really nicely, because as long as there's a stable impedance across all frequencies, the Class D amp is pretty darn linear. But it's when you have, noticeable swings in impedance across different frequencies, which the majority of speakers, if we're being honest, do have. They might go down to 3.2 ohms at their absolute minimum and go up to, 25, 30 ohms at their absolute maximum. And when you connect that to, an inexpensive Class D amp like that, it's not going to deliver completely linear response into a fluctuating, changing impedance load like that. So a lot depends on the speakers you're connected to. What's interesting is, like, if you look at the lineup of professional Class D amplifiers that, say, Crown offers, you're like, why do they have so many models? A bunch of them are the exact same wattage. Why do they have so many different models? Well, in the professional realm, they actually give you the impedance plots. And then they're like, hey, look, you got to find the speakers where their impedance plot matches the impedance plot of this Class D amplifier. They trust professionals to look at those graphs and make that type of determination, but they'll do that, and they'll have multiple different versions, really, really similar, but multiple versions of their professional Class D amps with slightly different impedance curves on their output impedance to match specific professional speakers. Now, in the consumer realm, that's not what's expected. They're not expecting consumers to look and do this sort of input and output impedance matching, and it's not like matching where they match. It's just like the graphs will respond well instead of fighting each other. They don't expect consumers to do that. So, I mean, there are some Class D amplifiers like the Hypex Encore amplifiers where they have a ton of corrective circuitry on them so that it doesn't really matter what impedance speaker you connect them to. They are going to respond linearly. You'll notice they're way more expensive. They're more expensive than similarly powerful Class AB amplifiers. So to put in all of that correction and filtering, it ends up upping the cost a lot. So are Class D amps right up there with Class AB? They can be. And if you're matching them to specific speakers, they definitely can be. But if you're going to try to match them with any old speaker, then you're going to have to pay a premium. That's right.
For all the corrective circuitry, like Rob was saying. That's why, like Bang & Olufsen, when they put out their ice amps, people got all excited about them because they were so cheap and they saved a lot. You got a lot of power for a lot of wattage for a little bit of power, and no real heat. But what people quickly found out is that you can shove an ice block amplifier into any old container, but that's not where Bang & Olufsen stopped. They didn't create this; they created it, and then they tailored the circuitry around it to give the sound that they wanted to get out of their speakers, which is another whole level. But what happened with the ice block revolution, or I guess fad, is that people are like, I can get these things for cheap. I can put them in a nice box. I can, sell them for a premium. And people were real excited about them because, even at a premium, they were still pretty inexpensive. But then we found pretty quickly that you needed to have a level of expertise that most of these resellers weren't having. So he asked if he were to somehow have 9 channels of Class D amplification somehow, I wonder how, and only use his SR6012 as a pre-pro, would he save a ton of power and heat? You would save power. And you would probably get, the heat isn't all amplification.
Not all.
It can be a lot of it, but it doesn't necessarily, like, we know of certain, depending on what you're asking your receiver to do, there are circuitry within there that generate a ton of heat. Video processing.
The video circuitry
can put out a ton of heat. So would your receiver run cooler? Probably.
Probably.
but not definitely, and maybe not as much as you think it. You might. I think what you think is you're gonna plug in all these Class D amps, and suddenly your receiver's gonna be cool as a cucumber. It's still gonna get warm because it's doing a lot of other stuff in there.
Now we could say the absolute latest Den and Marantz models. In the case of Marantz, the ones that end in a 15. There we would expect them if you didn't use any of the internal amplifiers. They have the ability to 100% electrically disconnect them, but that's only in the newest ones, the ones that came out in 2020. Your SR6012
everything else does not have. It's still filling all those capacitors with power. In case you want some power from the amps. So. It's still going to be pulling quite a. It won't be using much, but it'll still pull it. To keep those capacitors full. I can't tell if you're talking or not.
No, we're good.
Talking? Okay, okay, because you've cut in and out a couple of times, and I wasn't sure if you're cutting. Okay, so he says, are there any cheap, good multi-channel Class D amps with about 9-channel Class D receivers? So the Class D receivers that you can find on the market are exclusively Pioneers. Those are the only people that we know that continue to use Class D. So if you wanted Class D amplification in a receiver, you would have to buy a Pioneer.
And some of the amplifier channels in some of the Anthem models, so not all of them. I'm pretty sure the main 5 channels are pretty much always Class A-B in the Anthems, but sometimes the other channels, the backs and the overheads, they'll make those Class D instead. So it's a bit of some or the other. Yeah. I don't know any good, cheap multi-channel Class D amplifiers. I know some good multi-channel Class D amplifiers, but they ain't cheap. They're those HyperX Encore
Rotel used to make them too. Rotel used to make a Class D amplifier, and it wasn't cheap, but I'm pretty sure it was good.
Yeah.
So, like we said, good and cheap. Now, if your speakers are playing nice, with the Class D amps you currently have, well, you could maybe take a not good but cheap Class D amplifier and it will still be okay. But just don't expect that you'll be able to change your speakers and have the same experience. Michael is building a new house, and he'll have a dedicated theater room built from scratch. It's going to be 19 feet wide and 29 feet long, about 5,500 cubic feet.
That's a big room.
Did I say so? Okay, I thought I said something wrong.
No.
5,500 cubic feet in volume. He decided to go with a pair of SVS PB16 Ultra subs and SVS Ultra Series speakers. We always seem to say that bookshelf models are best choice for your front, so here it comes. But what about in his case? Would the Ultra Towers deliver genuine benefits? He'd be perfectly happy to see the difference in price between the Ultra bookshelves and the Ultra Towers if there's truly no objective reason to get the towers in his setup. So what do we say? 29 feet long, 19 feet wide.
Yeah.
You're gonna be sitting pretty far away, unless even if you're doing a false wall, you're probably still gonna be sitting pretty far away.
And the back row, certainly. I can't imagine this is the room he's building as a dedicated theater, and then having only one row in a 29-foot long room. That would strike me as slightly odd.
Okay, I know he says a dedicated theater room, but I think a lot of people say dedicated theater room. What they mean is like it's going to be dedicated to theater, except for the back half, which will be a pool table.
We don't know, though. We don't know.
Yes, we don't know. So how far are you going to sit from your front speakers is the question that you have to ask. It more than anything else, that's the question you have to ask. If you're sitting now, I think let me give you some options here. If you really want, if you want tower speakers, I think you can get tower speakers and I think that will probably be fine in this
Interestingly, Michael here would actually prefer to save the money. So, yeah. So,
if you are more interested in an amplifier, you can get the bookshelf speakers and then buy an amplifier, which would be, I don't know if it would save you any money, but, a lot of people want to buy amps, so this is a good excuse to buy one. I think the Ultra bookshelves could probably work in this room as well. You might need amplification for them, depending on what receiver you're going with. But
And just sheer volume of air, like you're getting there to where in that crossover region, going, upwards of 160, 320 hertz, where the speaker is definitely responsible. It's like, yeah, you're getting there. I mean, look, I'll put it to you this way, Michael. If this were my room, if I had a 19 wide by 29 foot long, 5,500 cubic foot room, I would opt for the towers. I actually would. Now that is assuming that like that whole space is being used as a theater, and some of the seats
and you have 2 rows of seats.
Yeah, some of the seats that you care about are going to be 15 feet or greater away, which would seem like the point of having a room this size.
Right.
So assuming all of that is true, I would personally opt for the towers here, because I do think you're at that point where you're getting to the sort of output levels and you're getting to that upper bass output in that crossover region where you're going to want to have just the raw capability to do it. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, as long as you're sitting 15 feet or greater away.
Yeah.
If that front row and that's the only row that you really care about is 12 feet away, then
and the back half of your room is something else, which might be the case.
Yeah, the back half of your room is something else. Then or you're actually going. The front theater is the 19.
Right, yeah.
is the other way,
right.
And then the other side of the theater is doing something else. I don't know. Jason, unfortunately, even with our favorite wireless subwoofer kit, the Outlaw OAW4, Jason hasn't been able to achieve a flawless wireless connection. He gets interference pops every so often. He has tried all available wireless channels that could be selected. Is there a different wireless subwoofer kit that would be worth trying, or would we expect any of the other brands to have the same issue? I am assuming, before we answer this question, that you have tried all the possible placement things that you can do, including making sure that you haven't just shoved the antennas behind the subwoofer because that's where it looks good, or behind your gear rack because that's hides it or whatever. I'm assuming that you have tried all the placement issues. If you have not, then you should. I mean, I would physically put them like facing each other across the room or wherever they are, so that just to test to see if if the interference isn't placement related.
Yeah.
Because if it's that way you can at least confirm that you're not having that issue. And if it is placement related, meaning that that you're not going to be able to leave them in that orientation, you're going to have to put them back to the way they were. The interference could very well be something that's going to affect you no matter what. So
yeah,
I would make that a priority to test that out first before I would go buy something else.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you can get a stable connection in here, and then then try to figure out if you can have that stable connection maintained by just changing placement of things. But if you can't, and you want to try a different adapter, then what do you got, Rob?
Yeah, so I'm going by the experience of Ara Dadarian, our friend over there at the HT guys, because he tested quite a few different wireless adapter kits, and the one that he found worked the best when he did that test was the one from Audio Engine, their W3. It's not crazy expensive, $150 for the transmitter and receiver kit, so it's right in the same price ballpark. I don't think the form factor is quite as nice as the Outlaw, but when he tested them, that was the one that he got to work the best. Now, would I fully expect that if the Outlaw is getting these interference things and you put the audio engines in exactly the same spot, that it's magically going to be interference free? I mean, it's not what I would truly expect, but given that Ara did all that testing and this was the one that worked the best, it's worth a shot, because I mean they'll refund your money if you return it. So yeah, it'd be worth a shot. So the W3 from Audio Engine, maybe give that one a try.
Okay. Chris, we recently gave some under $300 small subwoofer suggestions to him. Chris is curious what we think about a couple of particular offerings from OSD, which is the Outdoor Speaker Depot, which we used to recommend.
Yeah,
but I don't think
until they got rid of all the speakers that we liked from them.
Right. One model they offer is the Nero Dual 8X. It's basically an 11-inch cube with dual 8-inch drivers and a 300-watt DSP amp with a smartphone app for $230. The specs say it's -3 dB at 20 hertz, which Chris would be surprised at, but maybe in a small room. I'm going to click on it, I guess.
Okay.
So I can see it.
So it is not dual active. It is one active 8-inch driver and one 8-inch passive radiator. So it is a passive radiator design. It's a base reflex design in that sense. Instead of a port, it has a passive radiator, but that's what's going on there. No, I really don't think that if SVS with dual active 8-inch drivers and an 800-watt amplifier still wasn't able to get to minus 3 dB at 20 hertz, if SVS couldn't do it with all of that, I don't think this one is. I mean, look, I'm sure that if you turn the volume down low enough, you can make
that's
the
the
graph
question.
flat.
Right.
But yeah.
So whenever you see something that has a spec that's this outrageous,
Right.
you have to ask yourself at what volume.
Yeah.
Like, everything plays 20 hertz.
Sure.
Any driver can play to 20 hertz. Any tweeter will play 20
your
hertz.
earphones do it.
You can't hear it, but it does it.
Sure.
Because the volume is so low. The other thing too is whenever you have a single passive radiator like this, you do often have to worry about the subwoofer walking as it tries to make
and
as the
distortion.
It's
pretty hard to avoid distortion with this design.
Yeah. Then they also have a 13.5-inch diameter cylinder sub with a 10-inch driver and a 400-watt amp. This one doesn't have a smartphone app, though, whatever. It's the Tube Base 10 for $190. Hello. Welcome to my what was in my trunk when I was in high school. Oh, my God, this thing is cute.
Yeah.
The specs on this one only claim 30 hertz extension, but we always like cylinders, right? So what are our thoughts on these options? Man, why don't you just buy them and tell us what you think? How about
I mean, he was thinking about picking up that particular. He seems very interested in the dual
$188 here in on this thing. So $190. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I thought that was $230. I mean, it looks like half of a SVS sub. It's really good. It's
like height wise.
Height wise, yeah, it's small. It kind of feel like I could put two of them on top of each other. There's no port in this thing?
There is on the bottom. There's a kind of a slot port on.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, kind of part of the underside edge there. So this is also bass reflex slot port on the bottom as well as the 10-inch driver.
I mean, it claims a 30 hertz with a 10-inch driver and 400-watt amp. That's not outrageous.
Yeah,
that seems more reasonable than
one
the
of the
other
things that gave me pause with both of these were the weights. Because I'm pretty sure that dual X8 was like 17 pounds, and I think the cylinder was like
this is 18
pounds, and that's light. That's light.
I think the SVS, a single SVS driver, weighs more than 18 pounds.
Well, that was just it. I mean, you're pretty sure there
Yeah.
aren't some huge magnets in here. Like, look, amplifiers don't have to weigh much at all anymore. So that's not super surprising. But the cabinet
also
and the magnet.
speaks to the bracing and everything else that's in there. So you could try it.
Sure.
I mean, you could just make sure that wherever you buy it from, and I don't know if this is the only place you can buy it, make sure they have a return policy that you could. Yeah. I like how they say compare at $400. Yeah, I can compare it to $1,000, but it doesn't mean it's going to come out on top. So the things that would worry me about this is, like Rob said, that the weight is a concern because it speaks to not only the driver quality and the amount of magnets and the power it actually has, but also the cabinet bracing and design. The cylinder subs, one of the joys of a cylinder is that it doesn't have to be quite as firmly braced because of its shape.
That's true.
That slot port on the bottom screams to me that it's going to whistle. It's going to chuff. It's going to make some sound. Slot ports in general are hard to do very correctly, and this one doesn't really look like they did anything but cut a hole in the box.
Kind of looks like it's just a hole in the bottom there.
So I would be
wary. Little hesitant. I mean, here's the thing. We know that the Dayton sub 1000, Dayton sub 1200, those are pretty known quantities at this point. Like, are they the be all end all of subwoofers? No, but in terms of, hey, I need a sub at under $300, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. Most people who get that are actually very pleasantly surprised because we talk about them as though they're somehow going to be like not very good just because our like starting point is $500.
Right, our start.
Most people get one of those like Daytons and they're like, man, they're a whole lot better than I thought. I'm really happy with this thing.
Go read Amazon reviews, man. Those people are freaking ecstatic. They're over the moon for some of these things. But guess what? They're going to be over the moon for these things too because they're going from nothing.
Right, sure.
And they don't know what good bass sounds like. And I mean, if you're going from nothing, well, buy one of these. You're going to be ecstatic. But we're telling you that there's, that essentially in the end, you're not going to end up with a subwoofer that you're going to keep for a long time. You're going to end up wanting to replace this, and when you replace it with something that's better, it's going to be so much better that you're going to look at this thing and want to throw it away, which is exactly what happened to me when I bought a KLH, little $100, $200, whatever it was, base module thing. And I mean, it felt like I had thrown money away. And I'd rather save up and get what I really want rather than buy something that is, good enough, or, what it's in my budget for right now. I'd rather spend the money on the thing I really want, knowing that I'm going to keep it for a long time and be happy with it, than buy the cheaper thing. And because I've just done it so many times. I've done it so many times where I bought something that I've been like, that I've ended up resenting, and that's not where you want to be. And my wife and I talk about this all the time, and that's where I am with like cycling right now, because cycling stuff is stupid expensive.
It can be
stupid expensive. So I'm struggling because my natural inclination is to spend as little as possible on these things. Like I cheap out constantly, but I also know that if I do it too much, I'm going to end up with stuff that I don't like. And that's where I am with my bike right now. I bought a bike not knowing I was going to start cycling, and now I desperately want another bike, but I can't afford it. I have a friend who's
what a surprise.
Got a $7,000 bike that he's selling for like $1,900, and I told my wife about it. She's like, and I'm like, dang it. So really kind of hoping that was not the response I was going to get.
So it is 1 o'clock. Do you need to?
It is.
Do you need to skip out?
How long is this question?
Dazz's?
I can probably do this really quick, but
Yeah.
I have to pick up my son at 1:30, and it's so I've got about 10 minutes to get out of this room.
Let's
and into
do
my car.
Dazz's, and then I'll wrap up with Terry's, because that was going to be all me anyway.
Okay, Dazz. Overall, Dazz is really happy with his completed home theater setup, so naturally he's wondering how he can change it. Don't. He doesn't want a false wall up front, but what about this idea? He could construct a frame that would allow him to mount his silver ticket screen frame some distance from his physical front wall, enough to position his center behind the screen. Then he could get silver tickets woven, acoustically transparent screen material, and swap out his current standard white. Any drawbacks? It would look weird and be expensive, and don't.
I mean, not crazy expensive, because the products he's talking about are not
Right.
crazy expensive.
But how far away is he sitting?
I think he's about.
It doesn't look that far.
Not crazy
and
far.
The silver ticket, woven screens are probably going to be fine, but you are a little bit more likely to see that weave.
Yeah, there is a bit of that.
I would be hesitant to do this in a setup that you're already really happy with. If it is that you want a bigger screen or you want it to be closer, you could do it with your current screen. Just move it closer.
He was mostly thinking about like the center speaker can go behind the screen, which I'm looking at his setup and I'm like, do you need that? Because that center speaker looks like it's got a clear line of sight to everybody.
I know.
And
I think it looks fine from here.
And then he was also like, I mean, he was kind of joking about this because he knows full well that it's all a little bit, first world problems. But he was like, yeah, he's got the SN CMT 340 SE speakers. They're standing to either side. They have a pretty matte black finish, but not 100% matte. He's like, they're not completely invisible when the lights go out. I can see a tiny reflection off the sides of my front left and right speakers coming off the screen. So if I pull my screen forward, then now I get no reflection off my speakers. I'm like, yeah. Or you could put a tiny piece of felt on the sides of your speakers, and that would accomplish the same thing.
Right.
So we're not huge into this idea, Daz. I think it's going to be more than you're anticipating to build that semi-false wall.
You might as well just go whole false wall if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be
and
that
if
much
you
more
are
expensive.
going to end up any closer than 12 feet from the screen, you might want to go see more AV ultrafine regardless.
And then you're talking
and then
a
it's
lot
a
of
lot
money.
more money.
Yeah. So he asked, could he pull off front wides? His room is 13 feet wide. He was concerned about the basement door on the left before, but honestly, it never gets used. So as long as it would be possible to move a speaker out of the way in an emergency, door doesn't really need to be accessible. That would give him an excuse to say he needs a receiver upgrade. So what do we think? On a side note, he also went with a rear sofa table and some bar stools to create an overflow third row, and it works nicely. Okay, whatever. 13 feet wide.
I mean, I know what Tom is going to say.
You know what I'm going to say. Rob's going to say, well, I mean, front wide sometimes can make a difference. I'm like, those speakers are going to be like inches from your other speakers.
Yep.
They're supposed to take the place of the first reflection points, and your first reflection points are like 6 inches in front of and to the side of your current speaker.
Yeah.
So why would you do this? Why would you do this? So no, you can't do this one either. Sorry.
Here's what I have to say about front wide speakers. I have no quarter for anything else. They have to go at plus minus 60 degrees. I know even Dolby gives you a small range like they do for all the speakers, right? They give a range of angles where they have to go. Dude, I have played with front wides probably more than anyone else you're going to find talking about them on a podcast. They have to go at 60, plus minus 60. I will accept nothing else. I don't think they're worth anything unless they go at exactly plus minus 60. So figure out where exactly plus minus 60 is in your room and see if that's at all feasible. Now, I am in a room even smaller and narrower than yours, and I have front wide speakers, and I gave up surround backs to do it. So, I'm okay with doing it, but make sure that exactly plus minus 60 degrees on your side walls is where they can go. Otherwise, don't do it. That's my answer.
Or don't do it. That's the takeaway. The takeaway is bad Dazz.
It will require a $2,500 X6700H at this point just to get you into it whatsoever. So there's that to consider too.
Right. All right. I have to go pick up my kid. Rob will continue. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Alrighty. Bye, Tom.
Bye.
Okay, so it is just I, and we only have Terry left on the list, and this was going to be all me talking anyway, so Tom and I were like, hey, why not? Let's just go ahead and end the topic list for this week. So, Terry says, he's like, we mentioned this last week, so you can do 7.2.6 using 3 receivers. Yes, you can. So Terry has a Marantz SR6011 that is running his current 7.2.4 configuration. He actually installed 6 overhead speakers. That was in anticipation of the day that he could expand his Atmos setup. So physically, the speakers are already up there in his ceiling. And he has already on hand 2 older Denon receivers. So he already has the 3 receivers, and he's already using one of those older Denon receivers as an amplifier for his rear height speakers right now. So he's familiar with the idea of using an older AV receiver mostly as an amplifier. So he was asking, can we walk him through this 3 receiver setup to expand 7.2.4 to 7.2.6? He gets how the pre-outs would be connected. So it's the top front left and the top rear left pre-outs would get connected to any stereo input of AV receiver number 1. And now those would act as the left and right speaker outputs, the front left and right speaker outputs of that additional AV receiver would be now powering your top front left and your top rear left. And then the center speaker output of this additional receiver would be derived from an up mixer like Dolby Pro Logic, and that would be your top middle. And then you would duplicate the same thing with a third AV receiver on the right-hand side. The top front right and the top rear right speakers, those pre-outs get plugged into any stereo input on AV receiver number 3. Now those come out of the front left and right speaker outputs of this third AV receiver, and the center is your top middle. So he gets that, but then he's wondering what listening mode does he have to put the second and third, in his case, his older Denon receivers. What listening mode does he have to put them into? They offer Dolby Pro Logic and a Matrix listening mode aside from the straight decoding. So I already gave the answer away in the description. Dolby Pro Logic, that's exactly what you want to do. You can set up the AV receiver so that it is only aware that there are 3 speakers in the system. You set it up as a 3.0 speaker setup system. He said, what various menu settings would there need to be? So let's talk about the older Denons that are just going to be powering your overhead speakers. Those ones are going to put them into Dolby Pro Logic listening mode. You're going to want to set them to full range for the 3 speakers so that it is not doing any bass management on the signal that's coming in. So those, you will manually set them to full range. You will leave their trim levels and you will leave their distances alone for now. We're going to get into this because it's a little bit more complicated than you might have anticipated. But for now, we're going to leave those alone. And yeah, we're going to just say that you have those 3 speakers, none other, and you can still activate Dolby Pro Logic. It'll derive a center, which ends up acting as your top middle. So that's for both of the Denons. That's pretty straightforward and easy. And then I'm going to get into what happens with your original Marantz SR6011, because Audyssey really complicates all of this, and then what we have to do at the end of it. So before I detail all of that, I want to say Josh Zyber has written a more detailed write-up about going beyond 7.1.4 than just about anybody else. Easy to find. It's still posted over at High Def Digest. As far as I know, Josh isn't writing over there anymore, but his articles are still there. It's 6 parts that he went through a very detailed and expanding scenario of going beyond 7.1.4. But yeah, that, tremendous detailed information there. It's going to take you a while to read through all of that, but that really goes into the full explanation. So I'm going to condense it a little bit and just say, here's what we need to do. So you're still going to run your SR6011 as 7.2.4. Nothing has changed there. The trick is in Audyssey, because here is the problem. If you physically connect everything, and the Denons are more or less acting as dumb amps, except that they're using Dolby Pro Logic to derive a center, and then running those 3 overhead speakers, as far as the Denons are concerned, full range. If you just straight run Audyssey on your Marantz, it might assign different distance settings to your top front speakers versus your top rear speakers. So like, let's say it says your top front speakers are 8 feet away and your top rear speakers are 9 feet away. And then it will give them different EQ curves. It's still going to try to EQ the top front speakers, and it's still going to try to EQ the top rear speakers. If you let Audyssey do that, then you have to think, okay, now what is the signal that's coming out of the Marantz pre-outs and getting sent to the Denons? And it means that what the Denon thinks is your front left and right speaker inputs, right? the top front left and the top rear left, going to Denon number 1. If those have different distances and different EQs in the signal that the Denon is receiving, it's not going to be able to derive a good center. Right? Deriving the center from a stereo signal, and that's what's going on, is a stereo left-right signal. Deriving the center requires there to be information that's the same in both channels. You have to have the same information in what's coming into the Denon, as far as the Denon is concerned, a left and right stereo pair. If there's the same information in both of those channels, then it can derive a center. If you've gone and set different timing via the distances, different levels, possibly, because Audyssey might have done that too, so different levels, so the volumes don't match, and equalization, then you're not going to get the same signal in the left and right that's coming into the Denon, and it's not going to derive a good top middle. So you actually need to essentially deactivate the Audyssey setting, the Audyssey EQ in particular, for your overhead speakers. You need to manually set the same distance and manually set the same level for your top fronts and your top rears. So those all need to be identical, same level and same distance. And then, thankfully, since you have an SR6011, you can use the Audyssey Editor app on your phone. And it's still going to attempt to EQ, because you're still going to want to EQ your 7 floor level speakers, and you can do that as normal. But what you can do is just curtain off the response, and just curtain off all of, so that it's only like as low as you can go, right? It's not touching any of the mid-range and treble, which is really all the overhead speakers are playing. You just curtain that right down so that it's only trying to EQ like as low as you can set it, which I forget what I think it's 100 hertz is as low as you can put the top curtain. So EQ is only going to be applied way down there in the bass, and that's not going to be a problem. All the mid-range and treble is left alone. You've curtained it off in the Audyssey Editor app, and EQ is not going to be applied. So now that there's no EQ being applied to the overhead pre-outs and you've manually made it so that the distances and levels are identical, now when those signals reach the Denon, it's getting identical information from its left and right inputs, and it can derive that top middle. So that's where, if you actually in real life have significant distance differences between your fronts and your rears overhead, and if you have need to apply significantly different levels to them, you might still need to manually do that in the Denons, right? This is the same as, okay, the signal came in. That's what we care about. The signal came in with identical left-right information, but imagine that my front left speaker is physically farther away from me than my front right speaker, so I would give them different distances and I would give them different levels to even that back out. So you can do that in the Denon manually if needed. In a lot of setups, it isn't really needed, but if needed, you can do that. And then don't worry about the EQ, okay? That's the simplest way I can put it. I know you could be like, maybe the Denons you have Audyssey 2, and you're going to run it just on the overhead speakers and try to get EQ on them that way. Honestly, just don't worry about it. It's Atmos. It's really not that critical that you have EQ applied to them, so I would strongly advise leaving that alone. So that's the tricky part of this scenario. You have to make sure that the pre-out signals for those overhead speakers, identical distances, identical levels, and no EQ being applied to them. You do that, you have the Denon set to Pro Logic. The bass management is still all being handled by the Marantz, so the bass is still being pulled out of the Atmos channels anyway and sent to your dual subwoofers as normal. We don't have to get super complicated with that, and that's the complex settings to get all of that done. Okie dokie. Well, I think that was it. We have no more questions left on the list. We've answered all that, went through a whole bunch of news, and hopefully some of those alternatives to Harmony remotes that we mentioned will give people some way to move forward without Logitech Harmony remotes being a possibility anymore. But yeah, go back up to the top here. Thank our listeners of the week. For anyone who would like to give a one-time PayPal donation, please just come to our website, avrant.com. On the desktop version of the website, over on the right-hand side, it says support AVRant, and that'll take you to PayPal. So that's a way to support us financially, one-time donation. And then for an ongoing automatic monthly donation, you can come to patreon.com/AVRant podcast and sign up there. $1 is the minimum, and that's an automatic monthly donation. So a huge thanks to our 124 patrons over there. And Bertrand, thank you so much for being one of our patrons. And then in non-financial ways to support us, Dazz, he's been encouraging everyone he meets on his Facebook groups to come and check out our podcast. So do appreciate that. If there's any new listeners who have come here because of Dazz's recommendation, welcome. Hope you've enjoyed the show. And then we also want to give thanks to Bertrand, Mark, AJ, Patricio, Michael, and Terry. They sent us notes of encouragement and notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going this whole time. So really appreciate that. It's really nice to get those. Wonderful to feel that sense of community. And thank you so much to everyone who continues to listen and send in your questions. This is the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. And to get those questions answered, all you have to do is email us. question@avrant.com is the email address. Please do use that to get on the podcast. question@avrant.com is where I pull all the questions from. So yeah, I think that wraps it up. I'll say on behalf of Tom Handry, this has been AVRant. I am Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.